Welcome to Sheth Marketing Academy. This lecture is on services industry. As all of us know, services industries is one of the largest sectors of any economy, but especially advanced economies. And 100 years ago, we went through the journey of creating manufacturing excellence when the country was turning from the agriculture to the industrial age. And now we are going from industrial to what is called the post-industrial age, mostly a services economy. Companies have tried different ways to excel in offering their services to their customers. And this lecture is all about what different companies have done to improve their competitiveness in the services companies and the industries. So let's start the journey. The title of the presentation is How to Achieve Service Excellence. As I mentioned earlier, services have omnipresence. It's everywhere. It is the largest sector in most advanced countries, such as in the United States. It is almost 70 to 75% of the economy. So is true for Japan, which is another aging, older, mature nation. That will be true of Germany. That will be true of most advanced economies in general. And economies that have become more advanced recently, such as Korea, same phenomenon is happening. So it's a very natural evolution. It is also becoming a significant contributor to the GDP of emerging economies. For example, in India, they went from the agriculture to the services industry much sooner and bypassed almost the manufacturing industry, especially with the revolution of the IT services industries, the deployment of the wireless technology, and brought about a huge transformation because one of the largest assets of India is the human capital, which is always identified with services economy. Same thing has happened in China. China, of course, went through the transition from an agriculture or the traditional society to an industrial manufacturing society, became the manufacturing capital of the world. But now they are actually planning out to shift the emphasis in the economy from manufacturing to more and more services sectors. Services sectors includes education, healthcare, of course, utilities. It is everywhere, as I will show you later on. The services range from, they are so universal, they range from utilities and infrastructure to education, health, and financial services. And these are pretty significant sectors of the American economy, and put together become the largest, obviously. Just to give you the size of the healthcare. In 1980, healthcare was only about 9.5% of the US economy GDP. It steadily grew, even though the economy grew quite a lot in the 90s, especially in America. And today it is almost averaging about 18% of the GDP on a $15 trillion economy. Healthcare alone has surpassed more than $2 trillion of the industry, and it is definitely one of the largest sectors when you compare GDPs of other nations. In other words, right after US, China, and maybe Germany or Japan, next major sector as a country, if it was the services industry, healthcare as a country would be the fourth or the fifth largest in the world. It's that big and still growing and taking a higher percentage of the GDP. And as the GDP surprisingly is not growing as fast in advanced countries, then it is going to take bigger share as a part of the total economy. Services are also equally prevalent both in the household market, the consumer market, as well as in the business markets. The business services include, for example, all of the corporate support services, office supplies as a service. It will include janitorial services. Just imagine and you see how much of the service sector is involved with the industrial sector. For example, repair maintenance on the machinery, repair maintenance on the buildings, etc. Just goes on and on. So a services sector has an omnipresence, which is, I think, another very key concept that we need to think about. So what forces are driving the growth of the services industry? And as I've identified 4 key sources, the biggest source turns out to be the changing demographics of advanced economies. And in the case of advanced economies, they're all aging, affluent, but aging economies, as we have talked about in other lectures. And as the people grow older, they worry about 2 things primarily. Their needs shift, and that is health preservation and wealth preservation. In fact, I've identified 4 major changes that can happen, such as, for example, health preservation, wealth preservation, safety security needs, as well as the recreational needs, both passive recreation, which is a service industry, and even the active recreations like sports. As I mentioned earlier, in fact, when you are young as a population, contact sports such as basketball, American football is great, or a soccer. At age 18, it's a great sport. At age 40, it hurts you a lot. So we are becoming more and more spectators rather than players ourselves, and it's creating enormous growth in the sports arena at the same time. So most of the major sports as active recreation, more as participants, as viewers, as fans, is becoming a very large economy. So we can talk about a bunch of things. Second major driver in advanced countries is that more and more families are dual income, career-oriented families. The US statistics are incredible that more than almost 50% of the total working population now consists of women. And of course, most of them are not necessarily in the manufacturing sector. Quite a lot of them are primarily in services sectors. Services sectors could be the clerical type services in the offices. Services sector would be obviously travel, tourism. Services sector would be healthcare. Services sector would be anything you can think about. And of course, into the managerial and professional category. So as families become dual income, career oriented, one of the first consequences is that you outsource homemaking activities. They have no time, and they can afford it. And therefore, the 3 main activities we do as homemakers are all becoming now commercial viabilities, such as cooking, cleaning, childcare. More and more people are eating out. Out of 3 meals a day, today on the average, 1.5 meals are eaten out, essentially 50%. And the other 50% that we bring it home, more than 50% of that is fully prepared, ready to eat, not ready to prepare, just ready to eat foods. So we have seen enormous home delivery phenomenon of fast food restaurants, or quick service restaurants as they call them. It's just increasing enormously, and the popularity of restaurants is still growing quite a lot, whether those are McDonald's type restaurants, or those are dining experiences restaurants, or those are just takeouts. Convenience matters now, as we have seen in the pizza industry, in terms of completely changing the paradigm for home delivery, which was never a concept till, for example, Domino's came out as a concept to say we can do the home delivery and guarantee assurance about the time. That's just one driver. Second major driver is it's a natural economic evolution. So when you go from agriculture to manufacturing countries to services countries, as we talked about China, as we talked about India, and now the next major wave in this direction is obviously Africa. Africa is on the rise, and it's a huge continent with about 900 million population, and population very quickly will exceed $1 billion economy, and all of them want to become modern middle class, which means they buy branded manufactured products. Even foods will be branded, packaged foods, for example, appliances. You can just think about automobiles, appliances, everything a typical homemaker will have, including homes themselves. And manufacturing itself, when consumers buy manufactured products, especially durable goods as they are called, it generates post-sale services. Now you have to repair and maintain the product. You have to finance the automobile. You have to finance the home. In fact, at one time, at Sears Roebuck, which was one of the largest retailers and probably the best retailer at one time, they were showing me the data that out of the $24 billion of merchandise group business, 34% of the profit came from financing. I don't know whether people know, but Sears was one of the early pioneers of a credit card. Had credit card, in fact, for almost 60 million households when the count of the households was about 80 million. Largest card penetration ever. They were very innovative in financing different schemes, etc. Satisfaction, return guaranteed, no problem, you can return anytime. It was an icon company. And again, 34% of the revenue came from financing. Additional 30% of the revenue at Sears came from, surprisingly, extended warranties. Mind-boggling. So in many ways, as I will talk about later on, as a country begins to buy, consumers begin to buy and consume manufactured products, especially durable goods, it generates post-sale services, such as financing, repair, maintenance, as I mentioned earlier. The next one is what I call the razor and the blade principle. Both in the industrial markets as well as in the household market, we have seen this phenomenon where you make it affordable for a customer to enter into the marketplace. That may be a product, but then you offer services that are bundled with the product. The most common example, obviously, in America is about cell phones. Cell phones will cost quite a lot, but now most cell phone operators will offer you cell phones at a huge subsidy or discount, and you continuously buy from them the services like a 2-year service contract. So it's a razor and a blade principle. You price the razor low, not enough margin, or a loss leader as it is called, but you make money on the lifetime value of the services that you provided, in this case the blade. This is also true at HP in the printer business, and they became one of the largest printer companies. They priced the printer cost so low, so affordable, that every desk could have a printer of its own. Of course, they make money on the cartridges. It's a typical pattern that I have seen in the industrial products. I have seen companies which are organized, so if you are going into the home construction industry or roofing materials or roofing itself or putting siding, you need the gun, you need the staples, and you need the nails. These are all automated machines. I know a company that dominates the industry by providing the guns free, but you have to buy their nails and staples. And of course, if they are outrageously pricing their nails and staples, there is no question that actually they will find somebody putting compatible nails and staples, but made at a lower cost. I mean, this used to be the case with automobile industries where after you bought the car, any repair maintenance, the parts had to come from the company that built the car. But then people began to make compatible products, so those alternative products at a lower price could fit into the same automobile, essentially. It's the same phenomenon. And now with the social media, rise of the social media is creating enormous razor and a blade principle. In the sense that I can sign up free, and therefore I have access to this whole social media phenomenon, whether it's a Facebook or a Google or whatever the YouTube phenomenon. But in exchange, what I'm doing is to allow access to me for advertising and sales purposes by and large. So again, a razor and a blade is a third major reason why services economy is inevitable to grow faster and faster relative to the total GDP of a company. And the last one is that more and more corporations have learned to outsource. Prior to the 80s, we believed in this conglomerate model. You buy lots of businesses, or you have lots of diversified groups. You have a holding company, parent company, that would provide internally all the services to get the economies of scale and economies of scope. That model was in disrepute in the late 80s, early 90s. More and more conglomerates were broken up by private equity companies buying and investing in them. Or conglomerates decided to divest lots of businesses and go back to their core business. So in the 80s, we went through this whole notion of re-engineering the corporation. In fact, outsourcing, downsizing, right-sizing were the buzzwords that came about. And therefore, corporations began to learn that they can get better service at a lower price from an outside vendor than what they would be able to provide internally themselves. You can clearly see the difference between the government services versus the private corporate services in the same way, because government services like to do it themselves rather than outsource it, and therefore you have all the bureaucracy, you have all the red tape, you have all the paperwork, etc. So this outsourcing became a mainstream phenomenon starting in the, I would say, mid-80s, late 80s, and has become a worldwide phenomenon. We had articles after articles written by management thought leaders saying core competency of the corporation. What is your core competency? Focus on that competency and let go everything else which are not really essential to doing business or for survival even. And therefore cost reduction came in, better service came in. And the first place that I saw this happen, of course, is in the payroll services, employee checks. More and more HR services other than payroll are outsourced, such as actually recruitment, for example, or even assessment of people. It's mostly outsourced industry. We have seen now more and more legal, accounting, and IT services. And by the way, as I've mentioned some other place, the biggest outsourcing is surprisingly in the marketing area. My estimates are running that 75% of all the dollars spent that we would classify as marketing dollars, such as advertising, such as promotion, such as market research, etc., we outsource to vendors. It's probably the higher percentage in that function in marketing than even IT services or HR services or legal and accounting services. People have always debated outsourcing versus automation. And I wanted to make a comment that more and more companies actually have permanently shifted from labor-intensive to machine-driven activities. And we saw this, what happened in the manufacturing has also happened now in the services sector within corporations, such as, for example, word processors came in the 70s, and basically you did not need the stenographers, you did not need the typist, you did not need a personal assistant who you dictated things. Those are all gone. People just do it on their own now pretty much. You just need a receptionist for phone calls and meetings. We have seen the same thing, more and more automation of all of these services within the company. Automation of legal services, payroll services, everything is online. So there is that boundary that's drawn. It doesn't mean services industries are not growing. It means that it is shifting from a people-intensive to more and more automated, as we have seen when we try to call the airlines. Everything we do online now, pretty much from finding out the schedule, the prices, the reservations. And now we have all the intermediaries who will facilitate you by aggregating information from different airlines, different hotels, etc., to make it more convenient for you. And you have a lot of applications or apps, especially on iPad. So these are the four forces that are driving our service excellence. How do you achieve service excellence? There's only one formula, like anything else. The best way to achieve service excellence is to create value for the customer. And now the question is, who is the customer? In services, we have to really understand that a customer is actually three separate entities within a household and definitely in corporations. A customer is a user, A customer is a payer and a customer is a buyer. So you talk about children's services such as doctors, education, whatever they are. The child is the user. He or she is the patient or a student. The parents actually are payers and buyers. It depends upon who does what. In the traditional family, the father used to be the payer and mother would be the buyer. Today we see role blurring and role reversal, and therefore it is very likely today the mother is the budget keeper. She is the manager of the money for the family, allocating resources to different activities. And father may be actually the one who takes the child to the school or brings the child back from the school. And that is true about the doctor's visits. We just think about the children alone as users and how big a service economy is around children alone in a society. Often a user is not a payer or a buyer, as it is true in healthcare, especially in America, where the healthcare, the patient is the user, but then the buyer is the insurance company, and of course the payer may be the corporation or the government. So corporate services are in the same category. So we need to understand that we need to create value for three different stakeholders. So the answer is very simple. If you provide a superior service at competitive prices in an experience-friendly manner, you will always win the market. You will always win the customers. So that's really the notion to say how companies provide superior service, what are the tactics and the strategies they use, how companies make these services more affordable, so the payer does not come as a bottleneck or as a naysayer in the family or in the corporation, the finance department typically, or the legal department sometimes. And how do you create an experience for the user and the buyer in a way that it is so pleasing that you want to do repeat business, you become emotionally attached in some ways rather than strictly looking at it as a transaction. Now, before I go further about how companies do it, I wanted to talk about what is a service. There is a lot of academic literature about this area. There are also many of the articles and books on professional magazines, especially more books, professional books have wonderful content. My definition is very simple. Service is an activity or an outcome performed by the supplier, usually for a fee, although we have many free services like the government services, parks and recreation. There are so many government services that are free. So I say usually for a fee, but without the transfer of ownership to the customer. In the case of a product, the ownership transfers to the buyer or the customer. In services, ownership does not transfer. Basically, you get the use of the service, but you don't own the service essentially, as is the key difference. Services are also perishable, which is a traditional definition. You can't store them. So in the old days, economists always talk about the perishable commodities like agricultural commodities, fruits and vegetables. The life on the shelf is very short if it is not processed, preserved, etc. But my view is that services are even more perishable than the agricultural products, because services are, if you do not utilize at this point in time, they're gone. You cannot store them. So telephone companies, the capacity, electricity, the capacity, unless you use it at that time, you cannot store it. People are trying to innovate how to store services, but it is not possible, usually by time shift, etc. But service is a most perishable commodity. And one has to think from that viewpoint about how companies can do a better job of getting more profitable revenue out of the services industry by thinking they're perishable, and therefore you have to do a lot more marginal costing, marginal pricing. Services are also unfortunately very variable. When we came to the manufacturing age, 100 years ago or so, we standardized quite a lot. We had to. Not just for economies of scale, but as an assembler of an automobile, for example, or as making of a packaged food or a packaged detergent or a toilet soap, you have so many ingredients that have to come together. You buy from so many suppliers, so many vendors. And therefore, you have to have a process standardization. Services generally are not the case. In services, you still have an enormous variability. And every time you have an enormous variability from one company to another company, or from one encounter to another encounter with the same company, people, customers are taking a risk. So we have the concept of perceived risk, where we talk about when you have performance uncertainty, usually you tend to become loyal to one company or one brand as a service provider that has a reliability offers that again and again in a consistent manner. And also, surprisingly, in fact, you begin to have a very strong word of mouth communication, because you now talk to your friends, your well-wishers, people who have the experience, and ask, who should I buy my service from? Whether it's a doctor, for example, whether it's an accountant, whether it's a lawyer. Sometimes turns out to be even for maid services at home. So variability of performance is another key dimension that separates services from the product or a manufacturing industry. Services also require more personalization. In fact, services is the place where usually you are co-creating value with the customer. Patient has to collaborate and cooperate with the physician. Together they create value. And that is becoming a norm in most services industries, that the user is also a co-creator of value, which is not the concept in manufacturing, where the supplier company will create all the value, and at best the customer will do value add. For example, I may buy a canned soup. Up to that level, the company has done all the processing from the raw materials such as a tomato or a chicken or whatever it is. But now I cannot just put the can on a plate and give it to the family. I have to open the can, I have to take the ingredients, warm them up, or even mix with something else to add my own flavor, personalization. I can do it for my family. So services are also require a lot more personalization, but in manufacturing it is usually value add. In services it is co-creating the value on a real-time basis. And hence we have invented a concept called one-to-one marketing in services industries. Especially in services industries where you have a direct billing and a direct relationship with the end customer, such as we have talked about, the telephone companies, the utility companies, the banks, etc. They're all services sector, travel agencies, whatever they are. Airlines now are becoming direct to the user, direct to the passenger, and therefore there I can engage almost one-to-one marketing with the same economies of scale as I've done before through market segmentation, for example. So that's the definition of the service. There are three types of services. I know there are many, many ways one can create a typology. My typology is that services could be pure just services, such as babysitting, such as legal advice, such as medical practice. Or services could be derived service, such as repairs, maintenance, where the demand would not arise for the service without prior acquisition, possession, use of the product. As we have given the example about durable goods, automobiles, appliances, etc. And the third one is a value-added service, where you are offering additional benefits to the customer above and beyond the product, as we talked about, such as financing. At General Motors, which used to be the largest corporation in the world in automobiles, their GMAC division actually was a very large multi-billion-dollar division financing automobiles, and eventually they also financed the home mortgages. System integration is very common in a B2B market, especially in the IT system. Or in traditional manufacturing, it will be called solution selling, such as a Siemens will try to do that thing. ABB, another European company, will try to do the same thing. General Electric will do the same thing in the energy business, where you bring all pieces together, whether you make them or somebody else, and you put them into a solution, which is what the customer is looking for. So customer says, I don't want to do the integration myself. In IT, it's called system integration by and large. So that's what the service is all about. Now I will talk about very sharp contrast between services industry and product industry or manufacturing. In the next chart, you will see several bullet points. The first point is that what should be the focus, or what has been the focus in the case of manufacturing about the market. It is transaction. At one time, you bought a car only once in your life. Even today, most people buy homes once in a life. So it's transaction. Even though one can repeat the transaction, you buy more times in your life cycle, or you buy grocery products more frequently every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but still the orientation of the product companies is transaction orientation. In services, by definition, it is a relationship. That is the anchor. Because a customer, especially for a utility company, as soon as he decides or she decides from whom to buy the service, surrenders the choice. We sign up with a utility company, even in a non-monopoly situation. We sign up for a phone company, a cell phone company. We sign up for a doctor, we sign up for a lawyer, we sign up for an accountant, and you continue till the marketer messes up that relationship. And marketer messes up in 2 or 3 things. One is that they're constantly changing their processes that disrupts customer buying behavior. Or they have a change in management and they have a new policy, a new procedure that disrupts the customer. As we have seen in the airline industry, in the banking industry, customers are loyal from the day one. So relationship is the anchor of services economy. What should be the objective of the corporation? In the case of product marketing, objective always has been acquisition. In the case of services industry, from the beginning it has to be continuity, an annuity model essentially, as we have seen in financial services, lifelong revenue generation. It's an annuity model, so retention is the focus, like relationship is the focus and retention is the objective. Who is the customer? And I should have put that as point number 1 actually. In the case of product marketing, customer is the buyer. In the case of services marketing, customer is the user. Very important to distinguish. Because it's a user, emotions are involved. Buyers have strictly an economic relationship. Users have an emotional relationship. And not only that, but as users, they are emotionally bonding. As users, what matters most is experience, not just purchase of the product. 4th area is strategy. In the case of manufactured products, the strategy is to create excitement, hype, by tremendous amount of advertising, promotions, to have people buy on a transactional basis, because you may buy just once. In services, the emphasis shifts from excitement to experience, as I just mentioned. So what matters most is the experience here, okay? And therefore, we are now learning more and more customer experience is very key engagement or very key aspect, but it is absolutely mandatory, it is absolutely essential, it's necessary thing in a services industry. It may be a nice thing to do, or it may be more discretionary in a product industry. I will take next area that has to do with organizational structure. How should you be organized? In a typical manufacturing environment, probably the best organization even today would be the product-centric organization, either by brands or by product types. In an industrial company such as General Electric, for example, where you go by product line, sub-product lines, etc. In the case of services, automatically it's account-centric. Each customer is an account. So you begin to shift totally. So customer centricity becomes the heart and the core of services industry. How about processes? Processes in manufactured products or products marketing are non-interactive. I mean, if I have a problem with a purchase, I may go back and get a refund, for example. If product is contaminated, I can go back and return it. There may be a recall, but it's all afterthought. It's because of something else that happens. So it is non-interactive. As I mentioned earlier, services are totally interactive, where the customer and the supplier, or the producer and the consumer, are getting together, not the buyer and the seller. So it has to be interactive by definition. And as you know, the hottest area in marketing now is interactive marketing, but it is very central to services industries, services companies. And the last area I wanted to talk about is two areas: infrastructure, point number 7. More and more product industries, because of the high degree of automation in making products, to make them replicable, same product again and again in the assembly line, whether it's a bottle of beer or a Coca-Cola can, or whether it's anything else, it's very predictable outcome, where therefore it's all machine-based. Unfortunately or fortunately, services still will have a significant people relationship or a people connections. So we have to design services marketing by making sure that it remains people-centric. In services industries where they've tried to automate too much like a factory, it has actually boomeranged on the companies. And many companies are going back, not just outsourcing call centers to foreign countries, but just going online to do things. They're saying customers prefer some human interaction, whatever it is, and therefore how do we make our infrastructure still people-centric as opposed to machine-centric? Last one is measurement. In product marketing, as we evolve marketing, which has been always manufacturing-centric, we have always talked about that the best way to measure our performance in the marketplace is market share. And if I have a higher market share, I have therefore more economies of scale, I will be more profitable, the standard concepts. In the case of services, it is actually share of heart, not even a share of wallet. Share of wallet is still much more product-centric, which means how many more services the consumer will buy from me. Like a typical wealth manager who is a relationship manager will try to sell you not only brokerage services, life insurance services, but anything way to manage your wealth, including planned giving and all that stuff. But fundamentally, the way to measure excellence in services industries is, are you having the share of heart? Are customers bonded with you at an emotional plane, not strictly at a rational plane? And that's very key. So these are the differences between manufacturing and services industries. What I will do then is to go into talking about how companies have provided some centers of excellence or best practices. So I've done a lot of research on hundreds and hundreds of companies. I have myself been an advisor in several companies and industries, and I will take all that experience and put together that the best of the companies in the world focus on certain areas with which to provide excellence in service. So how do you create service excellence? Companies have tried many different things. Some have succeeded, some have failed. Some companies have become icons as role models. For example, at one time, FedEx, the logistics company, was the icon in the way they were delighting the customers. There have been other companies in services industries, such as some utility companies, who have been wonderful to their customers. Rather than go into anecdotes of those companies, I would like to really integrate, synthesize the knowledge into several initiatives you can take as marketing manager that will be appropriate to increase your competitive advantage or create a differential advantage in a services company. So here are clearly 10 different processes. The first one is quality obsession. In services industry, as I mentioned earlier, the variability of quality or performance is so large because there are no standards based upon a given process. Each one is pretty much idiosyncratic. Often improvisation takes place in a services encounter. So one of the ways to improve the reliability, predictability of service and therefore reduce the risk for the customers, especially B2B customer, where the cost of a service failure may be enormous, whether it's a power failure, for example, or whether it's a maintenance failure, whatever it turns out to be, is what I call quality obsession. And we know how to put the Six Sigma process, so the zero defect concept, even in services industries. For example, you may have a measure, as Swiss Air at one time used to have, how many bags in 1,000 bags will they be missing, or 10,000 or 100,000. And there is a counter out there in the central baggage exchange place in Zurich, which is their hubbing place, where everybody who is involved is now measured. They are informed actually on a real-time basis. This is in the old days. Now today I can do it through computers quite a lot, whether the bags are missing or not missing, or are they connected to the same plane and the same passenger. Now, of course, it's almost mandatory to do that because of the security issues. So it is either by regulation, by law, or by the technology, one can today improve the repeatability or the reliability of service performance through some sort of a quality initiative. Just as we did quality initiative in manufacturing in the 80s with the Malcolm Baldrige Award, following the Japanese example of how can you actually become world-class in manufacturing excellence, I think advanced countries, especially US, can learn how to become world-class in service excellence through quality obsession. And we have seen this at FedEx that I mentioned as an example. And lots of books have been written, articles have been written, cases have been written. So I don't want to go into the too much details, but FedEx as a company, you can Google on the company and find the way they do it in terms of quality for service excellence, and of course the way they measure it. My favorite now is Amazon. Amazon is very predictable. Not only predictable, but in a service encounter keeps you informed about the process with which, once you place an order, what is happening to your order. By the way, that is true of even office supplies companies such as Office Depot, for example, where they will tell you we received the order, they will tell you we shipped out at this day, they will tell you this is the day you should expect that you will get it. And other companies are emulating the Amazon experience essentially in the process through quality obsession. Second one is offer service guarantees, and this is a very key problem. Most companies somehow would not like to take upon themselves the risk. But we found that this was a very important way to improve service excellence. At Whirlpool, which is a manufacturing company, but they have a parts division, which is a services company. And the parts division had a very clear mandate that if the product or a part is defective, whether made by you or by your supplier, it incurs enormous cost to the dealer and to the customer eventually. And therefore, that calculate the cost of a defective product being put into some sort of a repair maintenance, like, compressor, for example, or whatever the parts are in a refrigerator or a washing machine. And they would therefore charge internally 4 to 5 times more than the cost of procurement of that product. With that economic penalty and incentive not to perform poorly, you begin to improve your quality obsession. So service guarantees I like very much. And of course, the better the company you are, it's very much like insurance business. The more you insure younger people, the less risk is for that insurance. So service guarantee is the same way. The more good you are in service excellence, the more you should be offering service guarantee. The extended warranties that we do on products, I think, can be done on a bunch of categories. I do remember an ad agency, Chicago-based, who tried to offer service guarantee. If the advertising campaign doesn't work, your money back, and it backfired on them because they could not deliver it. On the other hand, IT companies have done that very well by saying that we will take a contingency fee. In other words, we will show you that we are saving money to you, our performance is better, and we therefore get paid only if we measure up to your expectations. So we can provide delivery and time guarantee. We can provide extended service contract guarantees. So offering service guarantees is a second way you can improve your service excellence. The third one has to do with tangibilization of the service. This is very important. Services are intangible. They are more experiential. One is to identify that experience into something physical. So how do you tangibilize something that's intangible? You can tangibilize by a bunch of ways. One of them is to have an icon, such as Michelin has done quite a lot in the tire business with the Michelin tire icon they have created, a cartoon. You can have actually a mascot who represents you, and many services companies have some sort of a mascot. For example, it could be a dog, it could be a cat, it could be in fact any wild animal depending upon the setting, etc. Or you can have a human mascots of some sort, as we have seen in all the sports programming, whether those are college athletics or professional athletics. We have seen each athletic club has their own mascot, especially college, football, college basketball, you see the mascots. They are not only there to rah-rah and create excitement, but they represent, they symbolize, in fact, what that particular sports program stands for at that particular university or college. The third way clearly to create tangibilization is the atmospherics. The layout, the design, the music, all that stuff creates an ambience, as it is called. So atmospherics is very key, or ambience is very key in a store, which is a service retailer, essentially, or all services, or for example, in a shopping mall. And you can distinctly see the layout of different companies to differentiate themselves or tangibilize what they offer. Corporate campuses do the same thing. The way the atmospherics is created, you feel like you are on a campus. And quite often they are spread out, low, not too much tall buildings. It feels like the old academies in some fashion. And campuses are very well designed from that perspective. And now many corporate campuses are also becoming like university campuses. And the last one, and my favorite, and one that I find, is that you can tangibilize the service by a uniform. I believe in uniforms, primarily because it identifies the person as your ambassador. So in quick service restaurants, from McDonald's all the way to any other entity, you have a uniform. I've found in my research on McDonald's, very interestingly, the same young person who will not get up in time in the morning on weekends, or his or her room will be very messy, when they become McDonald's kid and try to service that store, they wake up early in the morning, even on a weekend, go to the store, put a McDonald's uniform, and they're totally different. They're not my son or my daughter. In fact, they behave so differently. There's a transformation. Uniform creates a transformation, just as it does in military, as it does on any of the service provider. In service industries, I believe it is very important to have some sort of a uniform with which people can identify and tangibilize the service company by and large. So the third point around here is tangibilize. The fourth way to improve or deliver service excellence is differentiating your value proposition. In other words, you can use service as the differentiator even though you are in a product industry. The best example I can come out is, and this is just one of many, but it's the best example, is Caterpillar. Caterpillar always has been the market leader, despite all the competition at the low end, at the high end, no matter what end. And the key differentiating factor for Caterpillar has been, it is not the equipment that you buy, but equipment's maintenance and performance in the use will be very valuable. So they have a service contract. And most of the companies who buy Caterpillar equipment are in the mining, construction industries, where the whole crew depends on the performance of that machine. If the machine breaks down, the cost is enormous. Not only the capital cost of that machine itself, but all the people who are using the machine, and everything is organized. So they offer a service guarantee. A value proposition is that you are buying Caterpillar so that you have no risk whatsoever in its usage, and they will come and replace, or they will come and fix it anywhere in the world beyond a certain window of time, which is a very short window of time, like 24 hours or 48 hours. That's unimaginable. By the way, that is also true in my earlier research in a book that I wrote. We found the same thing about Boeing. Boeing builds the aircraft. Airlines are their customers, but they have a complete tracking mechanism on every aircraft, especially metal fatigue. So before the plane gets into any kind of a dangerous situation, Boeing knows before the company does, and often before the pilot does. Incredible amount of excellence built into post-sale service, which is the usage side again, as opposed to the buying side. And of course, Singapore Airlines differentiates itself value proposition from a service viewpoint. So I think Singapore Airlines, again, the equipment is very expensive, just like Caterpillar we talked about. But more importantly, I think Singapore Airlines believes in having a service excellence, and it is always rated among the top 1 or 2 airlines in the world, along with obviously, Cathay Pacific, which is a Hong Kong-based company, and maybe Lufthansa. We don't have too many good airlines that come up to that level of excellence in the US at all. Even the niche players, cannot come up to that level. And Singapore Airlines has been able to maintain that over so many years, their leadership from a value proposition. So you differentiate your value proposition, which allows you not therefore to lower your prices and become a no-frills airline, but at the same time, you have a huge demand for your seats. So if you fly the non-stop flight on A380 Airbus, for example, let's say from New York, in Newark area to Singapore, or from San Francisco or Los Angeles to Singapore, or from any other part in Europe to Singapore, the flight is just flawless. And in the business class, in fact, I'm told one of those flights is all business class only, because there you are able to have enough price charged, and it is always full. So Newark, New Jersey to Singapore non-stop flight is all business class and quite popular among passengers, and they're willing to pay. Most of them, of course, will be business customers as opposed to leisure customers. Fifth point is value pricing. In other words, we need to think about service excellence to make it more affordable. And of course, the value pricing is just the opposite example in the airline, which is Southwest Airlines. Making it very fun. Their ticker symbol on stock exchange is LOVE, L-U-V, I think. Their whole campaign when they began was on love. We love you as a customer, passenger. They're not assigned any seats. It's a perfect example of co-creation of value. Passengers do a lot of work. They line up. They sit, for example, without any seat reservation. They do direct. They never go through an agent. They sell their own tickets online nowadays directly from Southwest Airlines. So Southwest Airlines has been #1 domestic carrier in America for many, many years since the 70s, and has been able to retain its leadership in the business pretty well. I think McDonald's has done a fantastic job in terms of providing value offering. With the changing demographics and especially the economic recession, McDonald's has gone out of its way to make sure that people see a value in the meal. But remember, value has been always a proposition, speed and value for the money. And they have simply revitalized that with a better campaign, etc., in recent times, and McDonald's sales and profitability have grown in the process. And of course, online trading now is all becoming automated. So e-trader, for example, or any of the online traders, I can do the stock exchange or transaction buying and selling at such affordable prices. So more people can participate in the service excellence, or participate in hiring or buying the services, and that's the value pricing. The next area has to do with what I call, which again is how do you create a value proposition, is service laddering. In other words, more and more service companies are learning that customers have different willingness and ability to pay. And therefore, can you offer the same service with different packages, different ambiances, and you create what has been historically created by Sears, what is called a good, better, best strategy. Same brand name, but you offer different levels of service depending upon what they're willing to pay. Now, they did it for the product category, but one can do it also for the services, as we have seen in frequent flyer programs, for example. So you have different categories of flyers. Very heavy users of airline begin to get into Uber flyers, million milers, whatever they call them, and that becomes a very key. And the last one, of course, is offering extended services, as we talked about, as a way of laddering services. So you create different levels of services and offer them in the marketplace to create value, and therefore you can segment the market based upon the level of service you perform, and therefore have different types of loyalties pretty much. Next activity or a program that companies have used to enhance their customer service excellence, or enhance their service excellence in general, is mass customize the offerings. In services, we often say personalize in some fashion, but it's the perfect blend of having the efficiency of a mass production and, of course, individualization, personalization of the service offering. In many of the restaurants, you can see that thing where you have a buffet. In buffet, quite often, such as salads, people do their own mixing, matching, whatever they want to do, and it's very common in many of the restaurants nowadays. Breakfast is always a buffet breakfast quite often. It speeds up the time. Most of the things are pre-prepared. It's a question of putting it together. We have seen this thing in many, many places where you do mass personalization, mass customization. My favorite example is the Chinese versus the French restaurants. French restaurants are more like customization. There is a recipe. The chef went to a school and learned that to repeat again and again the same way with consistency. However, the prices are very high. Also, in fact, the time it takes to prepare is long, and therefore they only turn table once. In order to make money, they have to charge high prices, create ambience, etc. On the other hand, you go to a Chinese restaurant, even a small Chinese restaurant will have a huge menu of 90 to 100 different items. Do you think the chef really has gone to a culinary school to learn different recipes? No, they basically know how to do factorials. You may have 10 ingredients, 12 ingredients, 5, 6 condiments, and you can make infinite combination. So what we have done in manufacturing, such as Motorola has done in the pager industry, many of the consumer electronics companies, the cell phone companies are all doing mass customization. Today it's possible to do in the services industry if you compare and contrast the French versus the Chinese way of offering things. By the way, not only is variety enormous to satisfy individual palate, but if you want to change the recipe, they're very willing to say, if you want to add a little more hot sauce, if you want to have a less spicy, they can mix and match. Especially Thai restaurant, I've seen that thing, and the speed is enormous. So mass customization is very clearly the one. And we see in education the same way, the current form of education where the students come to the class at a specified time, curriculum is fixed, and you have this brick and mortar way of education that doesn't have the flexibility to accommodate. I know some campuses have gone out of their way now in America to offer a class at midnight. because there are many working people who have shifts in the evening. And they would like to have a class starting at midnight going till 2:30 in the morning. Never anybody imagined that's possible except to manufacture in a factory where you have a third shift or a graveyard shift as they call it. But it's now possible. However, much better approach is online education. And online education is becoming a lot more core to the education process as opposed to being on the periphery or what I call the Rodney Dangerfield of higher education. There are now universities, online open universities, which are much larger in size. We thought University of Phoenix was the biggest competitor to higher education universities and colleges in America, with multiple campuses on a national level, close to 250,000 students studying at the same time. They're all working managers coming in the evening, but going to a physical place. The real size and the scale is in online education. For example, Indira Gandhi National Open University in India already has 3 million students all over the nation. Admission is open. There is no test with which you get admitted. It is just making people learn, improve their skills on the one hand, so they offer vocational technical training, but they also offer, in fact, a doctorate degree. It's absolutely incredible to see the diversity of programs, diversity of disciplines, and the diversity of students they cater to. This is unthinkable at one time in the higher education. And by the way, if you think this 3 million is a big size, I was told by a friend of mine who actually is dealing with some university or a government agency in China where they already have 5 million students studying online. So countries like China, India, Brazil, and maybe parts of Africa will end up becoming online as the primary platform and going to the campus as supplemental, complementary platform. In fact, we do that at my university. We offer a modular executive MBA program for very senior executives who are usually country managers from all over the world. And they come 4 or 5 times over 3 years, 2.5 years for a 1 week of residency, but then the rest of the course is everything is done online. And we are not necessarily unique, although we started quite earlier than others, but most campuses are now offering programs which are online degree programs, including full MBA program. So this is where one can mass customize, one can personalize the curriculum. It's much more flexible platform. The next area has to do with the experience, not just creating economic value or performance value, which is usually for the user or the payer, but now the person who really buys or who experiences the service. One of the key ingredients is the people-centric approach that I talked about. I'm very fond of having frontline people more competent than anybody. Unfortunately, in a typical organization, most of the frontline people, we keep them primarily low wage, low education. If some of them is smart, we move them up in the corporate hierarchy, and therefore people who are left behind are usually not the best of the people. What we have to learn is to create selection is more important than actually training and education, I find. The frontline people, if they are caring, they bond emotively with the customer. We believe this is a necessary thing in an education profession. The teacher must be caring. We think it's necessary in a religion, a faith, for example, where the priest or the, whoever is the leader of the church should be caring. We believe caring is absolutely the must thing of a criterion, for example, in hospitals and in healthcare. But I believe caring competence is universal. And the two words are very important to understand. It is both competency, that means they are knowledgeable, they know what they are doing, and they care at the same time. Caring without competence or competence without caring just does not work. So it's the combination. And as I mentioned, what matters is selection, aptitude of the people. We can provide constant certification and training as a way of weeding out people in some ways who are not capable of offering caring competence as your frontline people. And all of this says that the leadership, emotional leadership, as opposed to, let's say, economic leadership, shareholder value leadership, as opposed to, let's say, rational leadership in some fashion, but or IQ as we call it, intellectual leadership, emotional leadership is not at the top of the organization in a service industry. It is everywhere, and especially at the frontline people. And you see this in companies like UPS, logistics company. The frontline driver is competent. He cares about you. He cares about your package. You can just watch them and you know it is in a different experience level by and large. And this is true of many of the newer services industries, such as Starbucks, for example. So you recruit people who are reflection of customers. They are actually caring for the product, they care for the customer, they care for the service, etc. Next area is invest in frontline information systems. How do you make this caring, competent person enabled to do his or her job better? Only way out is to make technology enabling to that particular person. So we have seen this with mobility platforms now quite a lot for services companies like the banks and the cellular and airlines and the cellular telephone companies and the airlines. We have seen this online CRM or ordering online, for example, both in the business to business market as well as in the household market. So invest in frontline information systems, not information systems which are in the backside of the corporation. But this is really something that touches the customer and customer experiences, enhances with that blend of people and technology coming together. And the last area is invite ongoing feedback. Service encounter is experiential. It is not transactional. It's continuous. And therefore, you need continuous ongoing feedback. Preferably, in fact, continuous feedback, but if not episodic feedback, but more frequently. So continuous feedback and adjustment according to the feedback is a very key requirement to be good in service excellence. It is the dynamics of, in fact, co-production, as I mentioned to you. In other words, the household or the business customer is a co-producer with you in the services encounters. And the last one is that you need to have voice of the customer as a feedback experiences. In fact, one of our students is an entrepreneur. And he has a company called Voice of the Customer. And they do a lot of work for hospitality industry, where a customer can leave a voicemail message, because it's easier, pick up the telephone, there's a number, they're encouraged, rather than fill out the form, which takes many, many weeks to process and come out. This is an individual encounter, as in when it happens, and he has a way of taking that, breaking up into pieces, and actually listening to the voice and categorizing as a measurement technique. So in 24 hours or less even, the manager of the hotel gets together with his employees, all of them, whether that's a catering people, room service people, housekeeping people, lobby people, whatever they are, and shows you the experience customers had, positive or negative. It's fascinating to watch. I've seen this in operation, and I'm amazed how much emotive bonding comes from the voice communication by the customer and not from the written communication. You feel their pleasure. You feel their anguish, you feel their frustration, you feel their rage. And by the way, what they've done now is to have those messages literally sent on a BlackBerry platform. So every manager for each of these subcategories, such as the desk manager, for example, or the housekeeping manager, for example, gets a message right away. And one of them says, I will take this challenge in my hand and I'll fix the problem on the spot. That is ongoing feedback. Iterative process, much more iterative process, and constantly changing, which means the only way you can operate in services industry is improvisation and capability to be flexible. In manufacturing, what matters is efficiency and standardization. Here it is improvisation. It's very important. So I have articulated 10 different ways a company can increase or enhance its service excellence. And what I've done here is to have a simple exercise that you can ask your students, you can ask your managers to carry out. How good are we on those 10 dimensions? On a scale that goes from 1 to 10. So if you're very poor, you will give a score of 1. If you're very good or exceptional, you will give a score of 10, for example. And therefore, here are the same 10 categories. Develop quality obsession, how good are we? Offer service guarantees, tangibilize the service, differentiate value proposition, service laddering, mass customize your offerings, caring competence, how much do you have it, invest in frontline information system, and ongoing feedback. As you know, because there are 10 scales with 10 largest number, the maximum score would be 100. And therefore, you can look upon the score that you give, and obviously one would invest, one would change the company's processes, company's culture, company's offerings to go where you have the weakest score. Everybody agrees on that score. And by the way, when I've done this analysis, I find consistently two things that come out is lack of frontline information systems investment. That's the weakest link I find. IT side is always weak in the services industries, I find, and therefore one can excel by properly investing in the IT. And today IT is relatively affordable given that we are in the web-based economy essentially. And the second one, of course, is this ongoing feedback. That's usually a weaker link, I find. And therefore the lack of improvisation capability or the flexibility in the organization. So let's conclude. A company can achieve service excellence by delivering, as I mentioned before, superior performance, which is the service experience, performance value, at affordable prices in a personalized manner. If you can do those three things right, you satisfy all the three roles of a customer as a user, as a payer, and as a buyer. Service excellence generates fan loyalty, which is more emotionally bonding than customer loyalty. Have you seen the amount of emotion involved in sports, especially college sports? You know, we just finished, in fact, the basketball tournament annual championship, and the amount of emotion involved of people, both in the stadium as well as at home, is massive. As we have seen with Olympic Games, as we have seen, in fact, with World Cup, as we have seen with all of the global games in some fashion. So it bonds you at a higher level than strictly, in fact, loyalty does primarily. So it is the next level that comes about. I call it fan loyalty as opposed to customer loyalty. It is more difficult to imitate service excellence. I found again and again as I worked with different companies that if you have a great product, it is possible somebody to tear down and re-engineer and duplicate, imitate, copy the product. As we mentioned, many of in the industrial fasteners, since your price is very high for the nails and staples, people duplicate that and it fits very well, it performs well, it meets all the engineering standards. But in services, it's very hard to duplicate an excellent company. So for example, Singapore Airlines, people have tried. It's very hard to duplicate what they do. We can call it culture, we can call it whatever we want to call it, but it is absolutely precise, very methodical, very much, in fact, measurement, very time sensitive, but at the same time has this human touch, a personalization done at the frontline level. Starbucks is the same way. People have tried to duplicate that experience and there is no second choice to Starbucks in this country and surprisingly even more so in Asia. Their crowd behavior happens at Starbucks, just like we have a crowd behavior at Apple stores. Absolutely mind-boggling. And as I mentioned earlier, the best place to really differentiate yourself which somebody cannot duplicate is in the sports teams. Have you seen the price of the sports things? LA Dodgers, which was losing quite a lot, just will be bought by more than $1 billion as a franchise. Whether those are baseball franchises, the soccer franchises in Europe or in the rest of the world, or the cricket franchises in India, And similarly, the football franchises here, it's incredible. So this is a great thing. So if we can somehow practice those 10 ways to improve service excellence, we have a differential advantage. I hope you've enjoyed this session and this lecture on how to achieve service excellence. Thank you.